This is the posture of the bow grip. This stance allows for a greater extension of force, both sideways and upwards. As a result, what happens is that the movement of this part of the hand becomes much easier. Good morning. Shasoku Risen. Today, I have something for beginners. I definitely want you to remember this. This is a training method that significantly increases in strength. Based on how you handle your grip, I would like to introduce this. This channel shares methods for achieving accuracy and strong bow techniques, based on the philosophy and posture of archery and Zen. Today, I would like to bring you more from the world of archery and Zen. I encourage beginners to practice the pushing motion of the hands. This is when beginners, or those in their first year, struggle to improve their accuracy and wonder what the cause is. And it comes down to their grip. What can be done to strengthen the pushing motion of this grip? In that case, I definitely think it's a good idea to hold a bow. This pushing motion, even when no one is around. So I hope you will give it a try with that. To strengthen the movement and pressure of this hand and its inner workings, the first premise is to seriously consider what actions would negatively affect the movement and pressure of this hand. I really want this to feel good. The body, like this left hand, can move freely in this way. In our concept of standing Zen, the way the bow opens is entirely determined by the standing posture, and this leads to strong hits and the ability to open a strong bow, which means that it is not just the stretching but the entire body being extended. In other words, it is very important to create a state where the power to grow is even present without doing anything. For example, we need to ensure that the head is in a state where it is being gently without lifted. Any effort from the beginning. Means properly aligning things, like the direction of the toes or the angle of the ankles, so that the head remains in a light state at all times. That's how you can keep it, right? The position of the shoulders is also important. If the position of the shoulders comes behind the ears, the feeling of the arm muscles is like someone pulling on them. You can't create this kind of state. First, I want everyone to remember these: head and shoulders. This is about how to relax the muscles in these three areas of head and shoulders so that they naturally expand without any effort. This is what I want you to remember. I wrote an arrow here. These three areas here. There is a posture called that Tori 9-degree angle. And to create a state where the position of the head and shoulders are widened in this posture, what we need to do is, rather than just creating this, the posture of Toriyumi, this stance allows for a greater horizontal and upward force to be further enhanced. So what happens is that the movement of this hand becomes much easier. Therefore, when the hand is positioned like this, extending to the side, and the vertical force extending upwards becomes stronger for the first time. This movement becomes very easy to perform. If you only look at the movement, you probably won't understand. The most important thing is whether the hinge action is being performed or not. I would like to get started right away, but I need to write down a name first. This hinge action negatively affects the pushing motion and the movement of the hands. When this happens, you should lower your stomach, lighten your head, and spread the muscles in both shoulders to the sides. In this position, you raise your arms high, and if you push like this, the third hand's movement will become very light. If you create a state like this, it might make the movement of the major third easier. The stretching force here and here becomes a bit weak. Then, you see, the wrist tends to naturally exhibit this hinge-like movement. A hinge refers to the movement of a door. This is the kind of movement. I think the movement of the door is quite understandable. You can think of this as a motion that rotates in one direction, where a part is fixed, on an axis and rotates. However, the more this hinge action increases, the worse the movements in archery become. For example, this is also true for the drawing motion. The drawing motion must be completed without using the shoulders. What you need to use is not the shoulders, but the shoulder blade. Using the shoulder blade, this is the position of the shoulder blade here. After pulling this part like this, and then tensing the chest muscles, the shoulder blades drop down and fall back like this, and further connecting the bow vertically. These two movements together create a state where the arm can pull back the bow and lift it up. In that case, the shoulder joint is not being used. I want to create a state where the position of the scapula changes, and it lowers beneath the scapula. However, this is, for example, in the state I mentioned earlier, where it doesn't stretch up and down when it becomes difficult to perform the movement of lowering the shoulder blade that I mentioned earlier. What happens is that the shoulder joint ends up moving like a hinge. This makes it feel like the shoulder joint is being really compressed. Originally, the shoulder joint should be able to move more freely, but when it can't move and feels compressed, it goes in a bad direction. This hinge movement negatively affects the 9-degree motion. So there is a very simple way to create this hinge action. This is what is referred to as today's Kyudo style. For example, in the large 3 movements, a common action is to alternate moving both fists in parallel. This movement precisely induces the hinge action. The reason why you tend to perform the hinge action is simple. That's because the reason is straightforward. As I mentioned, the force that opens sideways is weak during this construction. The reason the force that opens sideways becomes weak is that it opens sideways like this. The teaching of Kyudo is that the force actually extends sideways while stretching the vertical line. This is for beginners in archery. If you don't understand, you could say it stretches in a cross shape, both vertically and horizontally, like this. Perhaps it might be, but the force that extends sideways weakens due to insufficient growth. Well, a clear example of this is the head. In this position, like this, I don't think trying to stretch the arm muscles like this will be very effective. But I think if you lighten your head a bit, you'll feel a greater stretch. So, in this way, in fact, we already understand that the factors causing the deterioration of the push motion type being related to hinge. As I mentioned earlier, the main cause that triggers this hinge movement is that the upward and downward force is when standing. Furthermore, the force that extends sideways. As a result, since the extension of the arm muscles is weak, if you try to twist or rotate your wrist with force, this kind of outcome occurs. This is fundamentally different. I would like you to think a little about why the movement of rotating the wrist occurs. Why do we rotate our wrists like this? For example, let's say you want to focus solely on the shoulders. In the world of sports, for example, let's move our fists in parallel. The concept of moving both fists in parallel is also incorrect. It's not both fists that move in parallel, is it? What is moving in parallel, you ask? This is due to the parallel stretching force of the shoulder which is transmitted to the arms. As a result, the force is conveyed to the wrist. The correct interpretation is that it revolves. Let me introduce how it works. For example, if you say to rotate your wrist like this, when you rotate it like this, what happens is that the area around the wrist moves, but the movement of the wrist rotating or kneading is, in the case of the third action or the pulling action, it does happen. But I want everyone to change the way they initiate this. So, when it comes to changing the way, it's not about moving with hinges like before. If you open your whole body to the side, look at this. When you open your whole body to the side, your arms extend sideways. Then, the movement of the wrist will appear with a delay. When you perform the third action, like this, it will create an image of this state. If you don't intend to just knock on the door as it is, I think it will feel like knocking on a door, resulting in this kind of movement. This wrist tends to lag. And when it tries to extend sideways, while lagging, a rotational motion occurs naturally. So, we shouldn't just call this a rotational motion when the muscles in this arm and shoulder open up. The force that opens them comes from the core. So the arm muscles activate faster. As a result, the wrist lags a little, right? It's not supposed to be like this. It's supposed to be like that. When I say it opens sideways with a big three-part motion, the wrist tends to lag like this. It comes out late because of that. Later, I thought I would stretch the muscles in my arm. When I thought about stretching all the muscles in my upper arm and wrist sideways, the result was that when we decided to take this if big the strength to open sideways comes out, it goes like this, like this. I want you to develop the sense of how the wrist moves slowly. Please practice a bit of the large 3 movements like I just did. For example, you can raise your arm like this and hold this position in the large 3. But when you say, let's take the large 3, you can move your hands like this. The waist doesn't function at all as part of the technique. You can maintain this shape, right? In reality, those who are seriously listening this form of technique. But if you take your left hand will gradually become your shoulder tense. Will rise. And there's a high possibility that your shooting form will collapse. So instead, you should move your arms like this. Try to relax your abdominal muscles as possible. And lower your body weight. It's fine to squat down, just enough to bend your knees a little. You can squat down enough to bend your knees. Like if you open your elbows like this. I think the muscles in your arms will automatically be pulled sideways, causing your hands to move as well. After this, if you strengthen the force that extends sideways, even more after opening, it will create the shape of the inside of your hands. I would love for you to try things like rubber bows as well. When it comes to how to position your hands, ideally, it's not just about placing them this way, but rather that the force extending sideways becomes strong enough that you naturally align without even having to think about it. The ideal state is for your hands to be oriented correctly. So, the concept of how to take this bit is more about the arm's muscles stretching sideways rather than rotating, resulting in a delayed rotational movement that shapes the arm later. If beginners can remember this way of moving, they'll understand the essence of it. The hinge motion has been released. This hinge, the movement of the hinge mentioned earlier, is not created. Maybe if you hear this, but in the end, this might lead to the question of whether it's okay the wrist to rotate the wrist. The current movement is delayed, and as the arm's movement is delayed and tries to extend sideways, this kind of movement occurs. This is something that is happening naturally. The kind of movement I just mentioned is important as it induces behaves natural movement. For example, this is like when you align parallel to each other. I actually thought that moving both fists in parallel isn't very good, rather, according to old literature. Moving both fists in parallel isn't very good from the perspective of a way to draw a bow. That doesn't depend on form. If you do it like I mentioned earlier, your body will properly extend in a parallel. The reason why you can lift your wrist is that the hinge movement is just a result. It's not that you consciously lift your wrist. Rather, the entire body stretches, the wrist lifts like this, which is the hinge. So the wrist makes this kind of movement. If you try to lift without using the muscles in a bad direction. So I want you to change your concept of how to rotate your hands. I think everyone has used their wrist strength like this until now, but I want you to be able to perform movements that rotate the wrist without using it. So I can demonstrate a bit if that's okay. If you can do both, lowering the elbow with your abdominal and opening muscles, the elbow sideways. As for the wrist, would be great. It tends to move in a way that's easy to rotate, just like I showed earlier. So I think it would be great if you could keep that in mind and give it a try. So, for this video, if you liked it, please subscribe to the channel and give it a thumbs up. How to practice this technique. aimed at beginners by pressing the button. This time. In fact, there are still many beginners that I want. There are plenty of practice methods available. I summarized things like stretching exercises and gymnastics. If you're interested in such content, please check the description below where you can receive special materials related to this. There is a compiled document of these materials, so I hope you will download it. If you want to receive this material benefit, please be sure to register the newsletter and line on the registration page. The locations where this benefit can be received will be introduced. Not only that, but there will also be private videos, or perhaps methods and specified ways of doing things. I have prepared the materials, so if you study all your skills in archery will improve significantly. Please keep this in mind and give it a try. That concludes. Thank you very much.